My name is Neil Kumbiatis, so I'm personally with Pioneer Eclipse Canada. I've been in the floor care industry, specifically floors, for around the last 15 years. I started my career out on the equipment side, and then for the last 9 years, basically strictly doing coatings and cleaning products for the substrate. So I mean, I often say the back of my neck hurts because I'm always staring down at everything, but it's where I've spent my time. We're going to cover primarily two types of floors today: luxury vinyl tiles, which I may refer to as that, or as LVT. And we're also going to talk a little bit about concrete. We're not going to get into hard floor like terrazzo and marble and all of those types of things. It's a whole different animal. We're going to try to keep it pretty narrow if we can. We're going to talk about what defines each of those floor types. It's a little bit more complicated than just, well, that's a concrete floor and that's a luxury vinyl tile floor. There's a little bit more to it than that. And are they actually maintenance free? So let me get right to the end result here. No. No floor is truly maintenance free. If they were maintenance free, then, I mean, honestly, I'd be out of a job. So, and I personally don't want that, nor does my wife. And how do we take care of each floor type? So we've already decided they're not maintenance free. So how do we take care of it? What do we do to save ourselves the aggravation in the long run? So again, luxury vinyl tile, you'll have it in basically two types of finishes. You'll have it in, generally you'll see them as gloss floors or you'll see them as matte floors. Gloss being kind of shiny, reflective, a little bit of what we would consider depth to the floor. And then matte is one where it just doesn't have that, air quotes, wet look to it. It's a little bit flatter. And you'll see them in various environments. You'll see them in education. You'll see them in healthcare. You'll see them in retail environments as well. And we're also going to talk about concrete floors. So polished or matte. So super high gloss, which you typically see in a grocery application, or a little bit more matted. Again, you'll see in some groceries, some warehouses, places like that. All right, so LVT. Every single LVT floor, or you may have heard the expression LVP, luxury vinyl plank. Just quickly, the difference between luxury vinyl tile versus luxury vinyl plank floors. Plank tends to be more residential. The upper layer, where the color film is, that tends to actually be made out of wood, some sort of a substrate of wood, some species of wood. Luxury vinyl tile that we're talking about is synthetic from the bottom all the way up. So you can see, again, depending on the manufacturer of the floor, depending on how much the floor costs, these layers can be higher, lower quality, different materials going into them, but for the most part, this is what they are constructed of. You have a base layer, which is what goes down onto the floor, is always somewhat flexible and is always insulated because it goes down on top of a hard substrate like what we're going to talk about later on, concrete, and they want to get rid of some of the heat that's there. They're made to be flexible because your floor isn't necessarily going to be 100% flat, so it needs to be flexible enough to contour with the grooves of the floor. Then you're going to have a core made out of some sort of material. That's generally where the cost really changes. What's the density? What's the material that's been put into the core? It's also where your tongue and groove, your click and groove sections come up around the cores. Then you have your color film that pops up in the middle. And again, the color film can be made of really, can look like pretty much anything. If they want to do a custom floor, make it look like a river, make it somebody's face, make it a logo, make it whatever you want to. And then the next two layers, you don't always see both of them. You will always see a wear layer of some sort that, again, could be on a higher end floor for healthcare, could be an alcohol resistant wear layer, and you may even see UV protectants on top of that. UV not from the sun, but oftentimes because of the lighting that's inside, so as to not try to discolor anything that's below it. Why do people choose it? Well, it's generally very, very easy to put down an LVT floor. Like we said, there's a tongue and groove type system. You lay out your floor, you click it together, and you move on. There tends to be quite a bit of scratch resistance to them. Again, depending on the quality, the thickness of that wear layer that's there can have some amount of scratch resistance. And they also make claims that they are waterproof because you have vinyl, they'll repel the water.
How thick would that wear layer be? Like 1 millimeter?
About 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters. Again, that's where the costs tend to change. So the higher end ones, you'd see them up to maybe about 3 millimeters. Generally, though, around 1 millimeter. If you have a couple of layers, if you do have an additional UV layer, then that middle UV layer, or that middle wear layer tends to be a little bit thinner because they don't want to cake it up too high. Is an LVT floor maintenance free? And I already said I wasn't going to really, no, they're not maintenance free. There's two primary types of damage that always inevitably happen to LVT floors. The first is scratching. So any environment that you're thinking of, it can likely get scratched. You guys, I'm from Eastern Canada, so we don't get as much gravel and granite in our winter times, but you get a lot of sand and rock and everything stuck in people's shoes. So simply that, just walking over a floor can scratch that wear layer. Pushing a cart back and forth over top of it repeatedly. If one of the little tennis balls comes off the bottom of a chair in a school, that can scratch the floor. Once you've scratched that wear layer, it's scratched. That mark is going to be there essentially forever. And then we talked about waterproofing before. Hate to break it to you all, but they're not waterproof. Just the simple fact that those types of floors click in together, there's a gap. There's a seam right through every one. And you can see all the seams. They're exaggerated because of the amount of moisture that got onto there. But water can get in there. That core layer of the product is never a water repellent, waterproof membrane. Water will get in there and pool and split it, can potentially cause mold, can potentially cause all kinds of other issues with the floor, but the biggest thing is swelling. So as that floor starts to swell, your gaps get bigger, more water gets in, the gap gets bigger, more, and it's a pretty vicious cycle like that gets going. So, the first thing I always hear from people is, well, that doesn't happen on my floors. Our carpets are everything that we have on our furniture is very, very well protected. But again, one of those first examples I said was about what happens if you get rocks or gravel or granite stuck in your shoes and you walk in and scratch the floor. That can happen. In an education facility, what happens if toys keep dropping, desk gets pushed over, anything like that? That can happen. In a healthcare environment, there's beds that get rolled around, there's wheelchairs, there's carts, there's buggies, and again, there's people constantly walking down over top of it. One of the parts of what can damage a floor that we didn't mention, kind of the secret one that nobody really talks about, is the actual wear patterns on the floor. So if you go into most environments, I can guarantee you, if you look down the hallway and the sun's shining the right way, you're going to know where the most popular room is, or what the most popular path is that people take to go places. Because as you walk on these floors, your feet will constantly put a mark down on it. So beat down on that wear layer on that floor, and you're going to have a pattern going wherever it is. You'll get the same thing out of the chairs, out of the beds, out of everything if things are rolling in and out. Spills happen. Spills get down, and again, but my team will clean that up instantly. They're really quick to get on top of it. Sure, they could, but if it happens repeatedly, it doesn't take very long for that to get in there. But then again, they're going to go and they're going to clean up the sticky juice. They're going to pull out a mop and bucket, and they're going to clean it up. So again, they're putting more moisture down on the floor. I used to work on the equipment side, so I would say, never mind the mop and bucket, what about the auto scrubber? Well, the auto scrubber is doing exactly what it's supposed to. It's putting water down, it's spinning on the surface, whether it be a pad or a brush, it's spinning on the surface. And even if your squeegee is in 100% perfect condition, it's going to leave some water behind. There's going to be moisture left behind on the floor. It's inevitable. Then if you catch a little piece of hair or grass or whatever it is, now you've got a streak and you've got water sitting on your floor for longer periods of time. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are ways to maintain it. And it's important to remember this picture that we talked about before because of just the simple way that a LVT floor is constructed. So what's the best way to maintain it? Okay, sure, I'm the chemical manufacturing guy. I'm going to always say add one more layer to it, but it's crucial. That one more layer that you put down on the floor becomes your sacrificial wear layer. So when you get those scratches, when you get those gouges that happen, the finish is going to take the brunt of it. It's going to be repairable, it's going to be removable, it's going to be able to look perfect after that. Somebody went and spent a whole bunch of money to make that image a custom logo on their floor. So it's been printed perfectly exactly the way they want it. Well, these finishes will not affect the look of the floor at all because we talked gloss or matte. So if you want the deep look to it, you want the wet look, or you want the matted look, they're crystal clear finishes that go on top. So your image, your style that you're going for remains untouched. It seals in the gaps. I think other than just the simple scratches part, that's one of the biggest pieces there, because I do see the most common damage. Scratches, okay, scratches happen. The people don't get too offended by scratches, but swelling of those floors is what really burns people, because it just, like I said, as soon as that swell starts, it just gets worse and worse. But you can seal in the gaps with a finish. Now you've got one impermeable layer across the entire floor. Water spills, stains, alcohol, anything that hits that substrate is now hitting your new sacrificial layer, that thin finish that goes down on top of the floor. Repels the waters and stains, like we talked about. They're generally they're not very complex finishes to put down, really quite simple. We always recommend microfiber, but you put down a little bit of finish, and it's thin coats that are going down there, because you're not trying to build up a layer of gloss or build up a huge layer of protection. You're just trying to put down something that's going to give you a little bit of longevity to your floor. So now, how do you maintain it? We're going to go through a scenario here. So you've had that big scratch in the middle of the floor, and now you want to get rid of it because it's just really irritated you, and it's time for a change. You have to probably call a service person, either your on-site team, to come and do that. They need to cut the entire piece out, the section with the scratch, either the entire length of the board that's put down, or just a small section of it. But that means they have to cut the click and tongue grooves on either side. They then, if it's been glued to the floor, they have to scrape it off to remove it, to get it off, actually get it off the substrate. They have to hope they have the same size, at least the same length of board to put back down, or the same image, or the same pattern that they were trying to go with from what was under there before, and match it all up, put it back down, glue it down, and hope for the best. But now you've cut around that board to cut those grooves off so that you can place the new board in. Because the rest of the floor was glued down, you can't just peel it up, stick it in, and click it back down. If you didn't glue the floor down, then that may be an option for you. But you've cut around the board. Now you've got a bigger gap. So we were trying to fix a scratch. Now we've got a bigger gap that more water can get into. So we've, again, potentially compounded that problem. So we don't want to do that. If damage occurs, you can simply remove the finish. We're not trying to change the look of this floor. We're just trying to resolve. We haven't built up a whole bunch of layers. So you can mix up a little bit of the LVT-specific floor stripping solution, and just, if you're talking about a scratch, just clean off that area that's there. You strip that area there. Oftentimes, it's just, you're even just dunking the little circle, the little donut in the middle of your stripping pad into the solution, scrubbing it off, removing the finish over a section that will allow you to blend it in. Clean it, rinse it, dry it, use a foam brush, reapply a little bit more of that finish down. 1, 2, 3 coats, wherever you had left it at before. You just apply that little bit of a section. If you have a larger section, then sure, you can, again, use a more traditional method, mop and bucket, however you typically use to strip your floors out. You can go that route to strip it out as well and reapply. That is where you're removing full boards like that, that tends to be generally from a water damage type situation. But what if your floor is just losing some of its luster, some of its oomph to it? Again, you've had those people walking back and forth down. Now you have a wear pattern in your floor. That happened when you haven't been maintaining that type of a floor. Well, now the technologies have gotten so good that you can mix your finish, matte or gloss, with a maintainer, matte or gloss, that suits it. Why that's important is those maintainers don't add any additional steps to your daily cleaning. You run it through a mop and bucket, you run it through an auto scrubber, it adds a little bit more of those polymers back into the floor when you scrubbed it, and it helps maintain and rebuild that sacrificial wear layer that you've built into the floor. The key there, though, is you're not adding an additional step to your day. You're going to wash the floor anyways, so just wash it with a maintainer. In the summertime, twice a week. In the wintertime, if it's been a brutal winter, maybe 4 times a week. However, whatever your schedule is, you slot it in there to help with that. That was the primary for LVT floors. Any questions at all about LVT, or again, like we said, LVP, luxury vinyl plank sometimes comes up too?
Are all these floor finishes self-leveling? Because usually these floors are texture.
Yeah.
Where the dirt gets trapped.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they all level out. Because you're putting in such thin coats, your first coat is never going, there's always going to be more than one coat that you're going to put down, because that first one will almost act like a sealer, will to fill those gaps and level out. But yeah, the right types of finishes will certainly be able to get into those grooves, and then the second coat will smooth it all out for you. If you like the texture though, then again, you can go with one coat and just maintain just the simple one coat that's there. Yeah. The key for leveling, if people aren't aware of it, so imagine pouring water down onto a slanted floor of some sort. How well is the water going to move? If it's very, very viscous, it's going to stick and not move. If it's more liquidy, it's just going to run. So there needs to be the right balance of that. And again, these products are designed to float and flow appropriately so they can dry. But thin, our slogan is always thin, thin, thin to win. The less amount of product you can put down, the better off you'll be.
Question for you. Besides stripper, is there any other product that you can use?
There-
For finishing those floors?
You can use more aggressive brushes if you have a coating that's down. So you could use like an orbital tile type scrubber. Those will generally work quite well, especially if you only have a very, very small amount of finish that's down, which typically is the case. Because they're not very hard finishes. They don't dry with a lot of solids left behind. So again, a couple of the brands out there, like the Nilfis type things or the Mace Care type scrubbers that are there that are orbital motions, those ones will certainly work very well to do it. Yeah. Yeah, there's generally chemical-free ways to do pretty much everything out there. And again, it all depends on how much of a coating is left behind. So concrete. Well, concrete it's stone, right? It's dried stone. Water has evaporated, and you're left with this solid, what was a slurry, this solid mass of product that's left on the ground. It's generally, there's sand, there's aggregate, there's fillers, there's all kinds of things that get mixed all together and then poured down on the floor. There is an entire trade show just about how to maintain concrete floors, literally called, if you maybe have heard of it, called the World of Concrete, that takes place in Las Vegas. So again, we're not even scratching the surface of concrete maintenance here. It's a big show about it. So know that this topic here specifically, you can go really, really far down a rabbit hole. So we're going to try to keep this just up at the, kind of 30,000 foot level. But basically, the concrete gets mixed in the mix truck, gets brought over, and you hope that when they're pouring the concrete that everything on that truck has been laid at the same temperature because temperature can affect it. You're hoping that it's all come from the same quarry because different types of stones can affect it, how it all mixes together and how it all looks. But we're going to primarily talk about these two, let's call them finishes, looks of the concrete. Either that's been acid etched, kind of burned to give you a certain image to it, or that's been ground. And most common types of floors that you're going to come across have been one of these two. The ones that come farther down, you'll start to see on some driveways. You might see in warehousing. You may see in places that require more textured floors, but they're not really concerned about how the floor looks in terms of a shine and an appearance perspective on anything outside of those two up there. These are two terms that are kind of intertwined, but a little bit different, but extremely important every time you start talking about concrete. So yes, concrete is hard. Everyone knows concrete is hard. But there are different densities of concrete. So how much has it been compressed? Density is important because if it hasn't been compressed a whole lot, if it isn't very hard concrete, it'll be more porous. It'll be less susceptible to grinding and polishing. So softer concrete won't give you as much of a smooth finish, won't give you as much of a gloss, as much of a shine to it. Versus very, very dense concrete. Very hard concrete, you can polish it, you can hone it, you can make it look really nice. And then densification. Densification is typically the process of making concrete that's already there a little bit harder. Generally that is done chemically. Once your chemical floor is laid, and once your concrete floor, is laid and dried, you can't press that floor anymore to make it harder. You need to have a chemical reaction within the stone that's going to make it a little bit more dense, make it a little bit harder, make those pores all a little bit closer. So again, you know my answer to this one. Is concrete maintenance free? No. It's a lot less maintenance free than LVT floors. There is a lot of maintenance that is involved with concrete, but it's not all projects. When I say maintenance, I'm talking about what are you doing on a daily basis to clean that type of floor. And the program needs to be specific. If you walk down any grocery store that's made out of concrete, I guarantee you're going to see that type of an aisle. And without even looking at what's on the racks, you'll know that it's one of three things. It's where all the pickles are, it's where all the pop is, or it's where all the condiments are, the salad dressings and stuff. And if you haven't noticed, there's barbecue sauce bottles across the bottom there. So those are very acidic things. So those can really stain the floor. Again, they're porous. Concrete, it naturally is porous. And if it hasn't been densified, if it's not very, very hard concrete, that stain is going to get into the concrete and it's going to be there forever, unless you grind it probably 6 millimeters. Like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 6 millimeters of removal, concrete removal is a lot. And then again, we get traffic and wear. Walk down that same grocery store and you're going to see the shine, the reflectivity on the edges versus the center. As people walk on it, they're going to wear it, and they're not going to wear it in terms of bringing it down, but they're going to wear it in terms of its luster and its shine to it. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So how do you maintain it? You need to wash the floor with a concrete-specific daily cleaner. A concrete-specific daily cleaner is generally pH, let's call it pH balanced specifically for concrete. It will generally have lithium in it as well. And now lithium is one of the primary ingredients that ends up in a densifier. So if you were going to do a big grinding, and I'll show you a picture of a grinding later, when they're grinding these floors down a lot and getting all the dust and all the mess, they're adding densifiers into the floor to get that chemical reaction to make the floor harder. So when you use a concrete-specific daily cleaner, you're every single day adding a little bit more of that lithium. You're helping the floor in the long run get harder, which means you're going to be sealing up those pores a little bit more, which means you're more likely to repel stains. It will make it easier to polish as you go. And speaking of polishing, you're going to use a concrete-specific cleaning pad. There's grit levels on these concrete cleaning pads. And the grit levels are every manufacturer has a bit different. 3M's is different than Diversi's, and if we had cleaning pads, then ours would be a different style as well. But for the most part, it's like sandpaper. You've got your really coarse 50 grits. The lower the number, the more coarse it is, the more material you will remove on every pass. Generally, you'll see concrete finished at around 3,000 grit. So if you wash your floor on a daily basis at a 3,000 grit using a daily concrete-specific daily cleaner, you're going to continuously be adding densifier, making the floor harder, honing the floor, making it shine, keeping that look, keeping that image on the floor on a regular basis, so that those outside edges of the aisle, of your factory, of your warehouse, whatever it is a lot more seamlessly blended together. So again, depending on where you finished your actual grinding polish, the look that you're going with, that's the pad level that you're going to stay at. So this one here, I don't even want to speculate what level that is, but you'll see the difference here in a second. So obviously two very, very different looks that people have gone with here. Both clean, both concrete, but very different styles. Generally, when you want the mirror finish on a concrete floor, you're having to put down some sort of a permeable topical coating on it. So something that sticks to the floor, lets moisture and air gas off, but that leaves a protective film on top. If you're putting down a film like that on top of the finish, it will need to get burnished on some sort of a frequency. Once a week, twice a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on your traffic level. But to put a film like that down, you're going to have to burnish it at the beginning anyways, simply because it needs to get hot enough to really bond to the floor. So obviously those two styles there, very different in cost of maintenance. So those topical coatings can be pretty expensive to lay down, but they give you the best look at the end. The one a little bit farther down, maybe it'll be a little bit more matte, a little bit flatter of a finish, but you just need to run pads. You don't necessarily need to put something on. If spills are a real concern for you in your facility, so a lot of alcohols, a lot of acids going down, it is recommended generally to put some sort of a protectant on top, unless you know 100% for sure your teams are going to be able to get out there and clean that stain very quickly. The longer something sits on a concrete, because they're porous, as hard as they get, they're still porous, it can leach into the floor.
For the first two recommendations, would you recommend them for warehouse floors or not?
Absolutely, yeah. Bunzl is actually a great example. So if you've got their location in Edmonton, when they first built their new warehouse there, we polished the front section of their warehouse because they wanted to have that upper section look to it. But the rest of the warehouse, they are just cleaning with a concrete daily cleaner because they found that they were having challenges with dust. So they just wash the floor every single day with that. And dust has been their biggest problem. And then also the forklift truck wheels, leaving marks. And you leave marks, which again, there's petroleum-based solids inside the wheel that will get into the floor. And if you don't get it off quickly, it'll eventually leach into it. So if you clean it with a daily cleaner, make it harder, make it more dense, makes it easier to clean, repels all the dirt a lot better.
And that daily cleaner
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. You just run on a scrubber, and you're not going to, it's not a first day to next day result. Those things, this is my program, I'm going to run it for a long time. If you take the picture on day 1, take the picture on day 30, and then day 365, you will see pretty drastic differences over time in terms of the shine that comes off the floor. One small thing as well to think about, if you're in warehousing or large environments, I had a client that had large warehouses, went with a protective top film in their entire warehouse, then they converted all of their lighting to LED lighting, and at a dimmer, like a lower setting. So although it was a warehouse environment, because of the reflectivity off of the floor, the amount of pop that they got off the floor, they were able to significantly reduce their electrical bills in all of their warehousing right across the country. And then you'll see that start to come up on airplane hangars as well. They'll put, rather than going with epoxy, they'll go with high gloss floors so that they can see the undersides of the aircraft a lot better as well. So that we're starting to see that as a more common piece too. So this is one of those sections where, okay, we're not just cutting out a little section here. My floor is now dull. I didn't get onto this program right at the beginning. What do I do now? I'm kind of stuck. Well, there's two options for you. You need to either rebuild it, which can be done as a project, but is very expensive. There's all kinds of light-duty machines that can be used. I mean, we sell them. Everybody downstairs sells the light-duty machines that can do this. But like I said, there's entire trade shows built around concrete maintenance. And those machines tend to look like that. And that's a big, 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 messy job. So if you have a large square footage that you're trying to rebuild a floor to really get that look back, it's going to cost some money to do it. There's no way around it. If you can cut it off into sections, though, so again, you don't want to go that whole route, but you know that you can do wings or sections, entranceways, hallways, classrooms, whatever it might be, then you can generally do it over a period of time with lighter duty equipment and save yourself a little bit of money that way. And it can be done over, like I just said, can be done over a period of time. So if you're going to do it over a period of time, you have patience and not patience, and you don't mind doing it over a long stretch of time, you can run pads or discs or whichever, I mean, pick your poison here, and do a certain grit for a certain number of days, just in your general cleaning. Then you switch to the next grit. Then you switch to the next grit. Then you switch to the next grit. And that's oftentimes how we'll see grocery environments do it, is they'll just wash the floor. They'll be okay. I'm fine with a dull, flat, matte-looking store for a little while, but I know that after a period of a month, it's going to look better because they can just run their auto scrubbers and hone them as they go. So it takes time, takes a lot of patience to do it that way. But there's the biggest thing there, that every single concrete floor is completely different. Where's the quarry from? What's the stone? What's the mix? What's the temperature? What's the this? What's the that? In the same building, you can have it, depending on when it was all laid out, when the floors were all done. It can be very, very different. So it's really important to have a walkthrough with somebody that has dealt with concrete quite a bit in the past, to take a walkthrough and say, okay, I think we can save it here, I think we need to rebuild it there, or we can just create a program for you to maintain it. So that's concrete, let's say, in a nutshell. Are there any questions about concrete specifically? Yes?
I see the disc for powder scrubbers. Do you have the rectangular ones?
Right, they don't typically have them in rectangular shape for them, because the rectangular shapes are only for orbital, and we don't find that there can be enough speed put through on a orbital type scrubber for a small section. So I haven't personally come across a pad manufacturer that's making them orbital for concrete specifically. Not to say that it's not out there, but I haven't come across it.
Real quick, is there
Yes.
a specific paint if someone had a really high polished floor and they want to add a logo?
Yep.
Is there a better paint that would be used and then a finish over top of that so that when they're cleaning it's not tearing up the paint every time?
Yeah, there certainly are, because again, porous floors, right? It will get in. There are concrete specific paints that you'll find for hazard markings, for pathways, for any of that stuff that you can put down. They'll get into it, and then just simply from reading the logo of that manufacturer or the label from that manufacturer specifically, it'll generally say if a coating can be applied on top. Most cases they can, because the paint sinks into the substrate. Yeah. So are maintenance-free floors truly maintenance-free? They're not. I mean, Fortunately for, like I said at the beginning, fortunately for myself and my wife and my kids, they're not maintenance free, so I'm guaranteed to have a job. Can they be less intensive, less labor intensive than traditional substrates? Absolutely, if you start a program at the beginning. So what I always say is, if you spend a little bit more money up front, or just add the fact that you're going to have to maybe use, rather than using just a traditional daily cleaner on your concrete floor, or have to use a LVT specific maintainer in your auto scrubber, if you put that in, you're going to save yourself the trouble of having to rebuild a floor or rip out sections of LVT from the ground. And you just run it as a program right from day one. It will save, it guaranteed, hands down, will save money in the long run. And then every single situation is different. Every LVT floor can be somewhat different, but concrete, certainly completely different. Have one of your Bunzl representatives walk that floor, walk that situation with you, and kind of dial in the program, dial it in for you. Thank you.